It's midnight. You're standing over the sink, eating cereal straight out of the box, alone, because cooking a real meal for one person felt like too much effort. Millions of people do exactly this most nights. Some do it standing up, still in their work clothes. Some do it scrolling a phone with the other hand, barely tasting what's in the bowl. It feels like a small, modern failure, a busy life thing, a too tired to cook thing. Here's the assumption hiding underneath that feeling, that eating alone is just a scheduling problem. Something your grandparents' generation solved with a family table, and something your generation lost to long commutes and single-person apartments and phones at dinner. A logistics problem, in other words. Fix the schedule, fix the dinner. Is that really all it is? Because here's a strange fact that gets skipped every time this topic comes up. In a controlled study, researchers gave chimpanzees, bonobos, and marmosets a simple choice. Open a door and let a companion join them at a shared food source, or keep the food to themselves. Given that choice, all three species opened the door far more often when there was no food behind it at all. The instant real food was on the table, company stopped being welcome. Scientists call this simply not co-feeding, and while primates will sometimes tolerate it, and chimpanzees are well known to hand off food to specific allies afterward, sitting down together, on purpose, to eat the same meal at the same time is not the default primate setting your closest relatives reach for. Somewhere, something built that default into you on top of what they have. And whatever that something was, it wasn't really about the food. Keep that question open. You're going to need it later, because eating alone tonight isn't just inconvenient. It's undoing something a lot older than dinner. Hold on to that open question, because the rest of this story starts somewhere that sounds completely unrelated to it. Fire. Every human culture ever recorded cooks its food. Every one, on every continent, in every climate, at every level of technology. Not one exception, anywhere, ever documented. That part you've probably already heard, maybe from a video that looked a lot like this one. And the usual next step in that story is your body. Your jaw is weaker than a chimpanzee's. Your gut is shorter, your teeth are smaller. Cooking pre-digests your food with heat before it ever reaches your mouth. And your body has spent something like 2 million years quietly reorganizing itself around that fact. That story is true. It is also, on its own, incomplete. You've heard cooking explained as if it were only about calories and brain size. That's not wrong. It's just half of it, and it's the half that's easiest to measure, which is probably why it's the half that keeps getting told. Here's the half that usually gets a single sentence at the very end, if it gets mentioned at all. A cooking fire cannot be built, fed, or guarded by one person doing everything alone. Someone has to gather fuel. Someone has to keep the flame alive through the night, because a fire that dies has to be relit from nothing. And for most of human history, that was slow, difficult, sometimes impossible. Someone has to watch the food while it cooks, because meat left over a fire unattended is meat. Any hyena or wolf in the area is happy to take. A raw fruit, by contrast, needs none of that. A chimpanzee picks it, eats it, and is done. Alone. In under a minute if it wants to be. Cooking removed that option. It replaced a task one individual could finish alone with a task that required other people standing around the same fire for as long as the meal took to prepare. That difference matters more than it sounds like it should. In 2017, a research team at Oxford, led by Robin Dunbar, ran a national survey testing something specific. Does eating with other people actually change how bonded you feel to them? Or does feeling bonded just make people eat together more? Coincidentally, because friends already like spending time together, those sound like the same question. They aren't. One means the meal is doing real work. The other means the meal is just along for the ride. Dunbar's team tracked which came first, and the answer surprised even the researchers running it. The bonding follows the eating, not the other way around. People who eat socially more often report being happier, more trusting of strangers, and more connected to their community. And the effect holds even after accounting for income and free time. Dunbar's explanation is chemical, not just social. Sharing a meal appears to trigger your brain's endorphin system, the same reward chemistry involved in laughter and physical touch, in a way that eating the identical food alone simply does not. There's a second piece of evidence, and it comes from watching people who still live the way our ancestors did for almost the entire span of human history. Anthropologist Polly Weissner spent 40 years, from the 1970s into the 2000s, recording conversations among the Jew Hawansi Bushmen of the Kalahari Desert. She compared what people talked about during the day to what they talked about at night, around the fire. Daytime talk was almost entirely practical. Complaints, logistics, who owed who what, the business of staying alive. Nighttime firelight talk was a completely different category of conversation. Stories, songs, ceremony. Gossip about people who weren't there, which sounds trivial until you realize gossip is how a group quietly agrees, together, on what counts as good and bad behavior, without anyone having to write a rule down. None of that nighttime activity competed with daylight survival work, because the fire itself had created a block of time that didn't exist before it. Time that wasn't good for hunting or gathering, but was good for exactly one thing: being around other people with nothing urgent to do. Take the fire away, and that block of time doesn't get spent some other way. It simply disappears, because there's nothing left holding everyone in the same place after dark. So here's a fair question, and it's worth sitting with for a second before moving on. Is any of this actually necessary? Or could cooking have delivered the calories without forcing the togetherness? Couldn't our ancestors have found some clever workaround, a way to cook alone, quietly, the same way you can microwave a single portion tonight without anyone noticing you exist? The honest answer is that cooking's biological payoff and its social cost arrived as one package, not two, at least for the roughly 2 million years before any workaround was possible. Here's why they were never separable. Heat does something specific to food at a chemical level. It's called gelatinization. Starch granules that are packed too tightly for your digestive enzymes to reach swell open when heated, releasing energy that was locked away in raw form. The same raw root that's barely worth chewing hands over dramatically more usable energy once it's been near a flame, without changing weight or size at all. Heat also unwinds tough proteins in meat, unraveling the tight structural fibers your stomach acid can barely touch, the same way it turns a stiff raw egg white into something soft enough to fall apart on a fork. Researchers have tested this directly. Mice fed cooked meat gained noticeably more weight than mice fed the exact same amount of raw meat, with nothing else about their diet changed. The heat itself was the entire difference. None of that chemistry can happen in your mouth in real time. It has to happen first, over a fire, which means the food has to sit still somewhere for a while before anyone eats it. That single requirement, food needs time near a flame before it's ready, is what turned eating from something instant into something scheduled. And a scheduled activity is a shared one, because someone has to be there when it's actually time. The payoff for accepting that inconvenience was enormous. Brazilian neuroscientist Susana Herculano Husel calculated what it would cost a raw food primate to grow a brain your size. A gorilla eating its normal raw diet would need to add roughly 2 more hours of chewing to the 8 or 9 it already spends every day, pushing total feeding time past 10 hours. There isn't 10 spare hours in a day for anything else. Not for a wild animal whose entire schedule is already built around finding and processing enough calories to survive until tomorrow. Cooked food changed that math completely, freeing something like 4 to 5 hours a day that used to be spent chewing raw plant matter down to something swallowable. The fossil record shows exactly what our ancestors did with hours like that. Around 1.8 million years ago, a new species appears with a smaller jaw, smaller teeth, a shorter gut, and a noticeably bigger brain. Homo erectus. Less machinery for grinding down raw food. More machinery for thinking. And, it turns out, more machinery for everything that thinking together makes possible. It's worth being honest here about what's still uncertain, because a good theory admits its own gaps. And this particular gap only just closed. For years, if cooking really started 1.8 million years ago, there was an awkward silence in the fossil record. The oldest confirmed fire use, at Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, was dated to only about 1 million years, leaving an 800,000-year hole between the theory and the physical proof. Then, in June of 2026, researchers using a new bone analysis technique went back through the cave's deepest layers and found burn signatures more than 30 meters inside, far past where a wildfire could ever reach on its own, dating to as much as 1.79 million years ago. The gap that had sat open for decades closed almost overnight. What isn't uncertain is what those freed hours were spent on once fire became routine. You already have half the answer. Dunbar's endorphin bonding, Weissner's firelight talk. Time that used to be swallowed by chewing became time for exactly the things that build a society. Teaching a child which plants are poisonous, arguing out a disagreement before it turns into a real one, planning tomorrow's hunt instead of just surviving today's, passing down which valley had water the last time it rained this little. None of that requires a fire built by one person for one person. All of it requires people gathered in one place for a stretch of time long enough to actually talk, And a fire is precisely what manufactures that stretch of time out of nothing. Compare that to a raw food forager for a second, because the contrast is the whole point. A chimpanzee that finds fruit doesn't need anyone else present to eat it, doesn't need to wait for it to be ready, and gains nothing extra by having company while it chews. There's no reason built into the food itself for anyone to gather. Cooked food flips every part of that. It can't be eaten the instant it's found. It requires fuel, tending, and protection, while it's vulnerable to theft or scavengers. It rewards showing up at a specific time and place, because that's the only way to get any of it while it's still warm. Nothing about raw foraging asks for a group. Almost everything about cooking does. So the fire wasn't just a cooking tool that happened to have social side effects. It functioned as something closer to a forcing mechanism, an invention that made group time mandatory in a way nothing before it had. Nobody had to want company around a cooking fire for the arrangement to work. The fire made the choice for them. The same way a scheduled meeting forces people into the same room, whether or not any of them individually feels like showing up. And that raises the real question this video actually promised you at the start. If eating together was ever load-bearing, structurally necessary, not just pleasant, then what happens when a species that spent close to 2 million years building itself around shared fires suddenly starts eating alone again? You don't have to guess. It's already being measured. In 2023, roughly 1 in 4 Americans said they'd eaten every single meal alone the day before, a 53% jump from 20 years earlier. Among people in their early 20s, the rate has nearly doubled in that same stretch of time, and restaurant reservations for a party of 1 have climbed sharply too, which means this isn't just people eating at home. It's a broad shift in how an entire generation eats, at home and out. Separately, researchers tracking American teenagers found that family dinners, once close to daily, dropped by almost a full meal a week between 1,996 and 2008 alone. And the decline landed hardest on lower-income families, the households with the least spare time to protect it. That drop isn't neutral. The same body of research links frequent family meals to lower rates of anxiety and depression in teenagers, higher life satisfaction, and a protective effect against depressive symptoms specifically in girls. Among older adults, the picture gets sharper still. People who eat alone, even when they live with family under the same roof, show a measurably higher mortality risk than people who don't, and a wider review of the data found that social isolation on its own raises the risk of death from any cause by more than a third. None of these are ancient hunter-gatherers being studied from a comfortable academic distance. These are people alive right now, and the pattern showing up in their blood work and their mental health records is the same pattern Dunbar found in his survey and Wiesner found around 40 years of firelight. Connection isn't a nice side effect of eating together. Removing it costs something real and measurable, in either direction. None of that is happening because modern food is worse. Cooked food today delivers more calories, more consistently, than any hunter-gatherer campfire ever could. The chemistry our ancestors unlocked with fire 2 million years ago is still doing exactly what it always did. What's missing isn't the nutrition, it's the forcing mechanism. Nobody has to stand guard over a fire together anymore, because a stove doesn't go out if you walk away from it. Nobody has to wait for the hearth to finish cooking before anyone can eat, because a microwave finishes in 90 seconds and a delivery app finishes without you doing anything at all. Every part of the system that used to require other people has quietly been engineered away, one convenience at a time, and each individual convenience looks harmless on its own. A faster stove, a single serving container, an app that means you never technically have to ask anyone else what they want to eat tonight. None of those inventions were designed to remove people from the process. They just happened to, because the forcing mechanism was never listed as a feature in the first place. It was just always there, quietly, underneath the food, until it wasn't. So, go back to the sink, at midnight, cereal in hand. That version of dinner isn't a failure of willpower, and it isn't only a modern life inconvenience. It's a return to something your closest living relatives already do without a second thought, and something our own ancestors spent nearly 2 million years building a fire specifically to prevent. Not because cooking alone is dangerous, not because the cereal itself is somehow worse for you than a cooked meal would be. It's because you're standing in the one spot in your entire evolutionary history where nothing is forcing anyone else to be standing there with you, and your body still, quietly, somewhere underneath the tiredness, notices the difference. You already had the answer standing at that counter. Cooking never really needed you, specifically, to survive. It needed you and someone else standing at the same fire, waiting for the same meal, for as long as it took to be ready. The food was always going to cook either way. The question, for close to 2 million years, was never really about the food. It was always about who was going to be there when it did.